$15 million a year for James Cook. We're talking about that and a whole lot more today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, folks, welcome in. Herd Mentality is the plan for this episode, the weekly episode where you control the discussion by sending in questions, comments, whatever you have, and I respond to it here on the podcast. We've got a lot to get into. Let's start with this James Cook conversation. Dan says, would love to hear your thoughts on the James Cook $15 million live pinned comment, and also your thoughts on using him in a trade package for a premier defensive lineman if they believe he is going to hold out this summer for a deal they're not willing to pay. So what Dan is referring to is, I think it was on Wednesday, James Cook did an Instagram live and put 15 million and pinned it to a comment. And it's certainly him coming out and stating that that's the dollar amount he's looking for in a contract extension. And my first thought on this is I don't really recall a Bills player recently having an open negotiation through social media for their contract extension. So this is definitely a new thing for Brandon Beane to deal with. We've certainly had players that you knew there were dynamics with the contract, whether that was Jordan Poyer or even Stephon Diggs, but to come out and really get specific with dollar amounts, that's new. That's new for this regime. And I'm sure that is what he wants, right? It's also a negotiation, so it's him putting his cards on the table, but you don't know where it's going to land. So I'm sure he's looking for every dollar he can get. And I'd expect for him to try to get the most money that he can. He's obviously had a really good start to his career, 2 great seasons in a row, ton of touchdowns this past year. Young running back. There's obviously a lot of conversations about the running back market and how it needs to accelerate. And I get it. I understand all those conversations. But I also don't think that's a fair amount for James Cook. And I'm going to really flesh this out in a Substack article, the Herd Mentality Substack. I'm going to aim to put that out today. I've been working on it. And, of course, I thought I was going to get ahead of this conversation, but James Cook puts that on his Instagram Live, and all of a sudden it is an accelerated conversation. So I'll share a whole lot more in the article. If you'd like to be part of the Herd Mentality Substack, there's a link in today's show notes to check that out. But I think there's a lot of dynamics in play that need to be considered for both sides to land at a fair number. And I think there's 3 things working against James Cook. Obviously, he's a good young player that's ascending, that has been productive. He's been durable. He's got a lot going for him. So let's not overlook that. But I think when you consider the reasons why $15 million is just not a fair dollar amount for the Bills, well, James Cook's not a third down running back, right? The Bills have Ty Johnson as their third down back. He's not the closer. So end of halves, he's not on the field. They leave that to Ray Davis and Ty Johnson. And overall, he's just a 45% of the snaps guy, talking about a half the time back. And the highly paid running backs in the NFL, who are Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, and Alvin Kamara, those 4 guys, those are your top 4 in APY. They're on the field 75 to 80% of snaps. They are the third down backs. They are the closer. They are the high volume of the snap guys. And James Cook's not that player. He's not CMC, Saquon Barkley, or Jonathan Taylor. And that doesn't mean he's not a really good player. I think James Cook's a very good player. But I think he's seeking a dollar amount that pays him like a running back that simply he's not. And so I think this could get sticky. I think there's obviously some influence from his brother, Dalvin Cook, and probably feeling like there was some opportunity and some money left on the table at the end of his career. And so it's very unique. And I'll tell you this, I am very much open to a trade. If he's a valuable asset that helps the Bills acquire a big-time defensive lineman, if it's a player, if it's a you get a meaningful draft pick, I'm open to that, because I don't think you want to lose James Cook for nothing, or hope to get a compensatory pick in a few years. But I do think that $15 million is not a fair amount. It's just not. He wants to get paid like he's Saquon Barkley or Christian McCaffrey or Jonathan Taylor. Well, those guys play 20, 30% more snaps than you do, because they're trusted to be on the field on passing downs and at the end of halves. That's just not who James Cook's proven to be, and I don't think that's a fair amount. And again, look, dude, go get your money, do your thing, market yourself. I don't take any exception with that, but I don't find $15 million to be a fair number for James Cook relative to the running back market. James says, you mentioned that the Bills typically start slowly in games, but adjust well by the third quarter. Why do you think they start slowly? Inadequate game planning, something else? What do you think they can do to turn this around and start faster in the first quarter? So let's clarify something here. The Bills' defense starts slow. The offense doesn't. The offense is terrific. If you look at the offensive EPA per play, per quarter, in the first quarter, it's fifth. In the second quarter, it's third. In the third quarter, it's third. In the fourth quarter, it's seventh. The offense is good from start to finish. Defensively, not so much. First quarter, EPA per play on defense, 29th. Second quarter, 21st. Third quarter, drum roll, first. And in the fourth quarter, it's 16th. So this is really a problem for the defense. And if you had to ask me why I think this is the case, I think there is a feeling out process early in games. And you're curious to see how an offense is going to attack your defense. You want to find what the tells are and make your adjustments. And I think the Bills want to find out those tells, live with it, and adjust. I think that's kind of what they want to do. But I also think that and I've heard this from some sources, that the Bills do want to come out and play fast on defense. And so they simplify things so that their players aren't thinking as much. Just stay true to your rules and play fast. And I think that's kind of backfired on them. And I think they do need to anticipate how teams are going to come out and attack them early and have some better answers earlier in games. And this is going to be, and already has been this offseason, a big talking point for me. And it's that there's a big time correlation between halftime leads and winning football games in any given year. 75 to 80% of the time, the team that is leading at halftime wins the game. That's big time. That's correlation for sure. And so, yeah, the Bills need to play better early in games, particularly on defense, to give themselves a better chance of winning even more. Obviously, they're a great team. They win a lot of football games. But when you look at the ones that they don't, it's because they start slow and can't overcome it. You look at the actual 4 losses that they had, the Chiefs in the championship game, Rams, Texans, Ravens. Every single one of those games, the Bills were down by 2 scores in the first half and trailed at halftime, and they lost the game. All right, well, figure that out. Andrew says, I've seen tweets suggesting that if another team hires Terrence Gray, we will receive a compensatory draft pick. Could you explain why that might be the case? Also, what is the total number of compensatory picks awarded across the league each year? Appreciate your insights into compensatory picks, as this is a confusing topic. All right, so let me add what I can here. Terrence Gray is in the Bills front office, and he's a candidate for the GM job with the Jaguars. And if he were to be hired, the Bills would receive 2 third-round picks. And so why is that the case? Well, there was a resolution in 2020 that if a minority employee is hired by another team to either be a head coach or a general manager, the team that they were hired away from gets a third-round compensatory draft pick in each of the next 2 drafts. So if the Bills were to lose Terrence Gray to be the general manager of the Jaguars, they'd get a 3rd-round pick this year. They'd get a 3rd-round pick next year. That's what would happen. And as far as total compensatory picks, there's 32, up to 32 compensatory picks awarded every single year. No team can have more than 4, but that does not include this deal where if you lose a minority person, whether it's a front office person or a coach that becomes a GM or a head coach, that doesn't factor in. In fact, last year there were 34 compensatory picks awarded because of this. And so we should know for sure the compensatory picks that are awarded sometime in mid-March. The Bills are expected to get some compensatory picks for losing Leonard Floyd and Gabe Davis. Potentially a couple of 5th-round picks is what the expectation is there. But we'll know for sure in about a month. And, of course, the reason for this program, this resolution, is so that teams can obviously emphasize putting minorities into positions that are going to position them to get the big-time jobs as GMs and head coaches. And that's where the NFL's at with it, and that would be the implications if Terrence Gray does become a head coach somewhere. All right, we got a lot more to get to on the other side of it, including a fascinating conversation on David Edwards, Connor McGovern, extensions, and maybe there's an extreme side to that conversation as it relates to David Edwards. I'll explain that here next. Be sure to stick with me. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. You can post your job, and in fact, they have a new feature that can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. Add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to get qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say that LinkedIn helps them find high-quality hires. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, folks, let's keep it moving here. The next one comes from Mark. Mark says, thinking about the offseason, I think David Edwards and Connor McGovern are both potential extension candidates with 1 year left on their current deals who are flying under the radar. What do you think the market value would be for each player if the Bills were to extend them? Good question here. It's fascinating. And I think as it relates to David Edwards, I think there are 2 extremes to this conversation. One of them being an extension. One of them being him getting released. And I think David Edwards is a good left guard, sufficient level starter. I think the team likes him. You know, he's a guy that played quarterback growing up, and he's a player that really understands what everybody on the field is doing, and he's very, very smart and has a history with Aaron Cromer. There's plenty of reasons to believe that the Bills would be committed to David Edwards. And if he were to get an extension, I think that would probably fall in the $6 million per year to $10 million per year range. Looking at John Simpson, who's at $6 million per, Alex Kappa, 8.75. John Runyon got 10 this past offseason. Ezra Cleveland is 8. I think he's probably in that range. It wouldn't surprise me anywhere from like $6 to $10 million per season. But like I said, there's an extreme side to that conversation. It's him being released. And I think, I'm not going to predict this, but it's at least worth talking about, where the Bills could release David Edwards for $4 million in cap savings and only have $875,000 in dead cap accumulation with a release. That's not nothing, right? That's fairly significant. And when you consider the pipeline that exists in Buffalo with some appealing young developing offensive linemen, maybe there is a starting left guard there between Alec Anderson, who's been very good as the utility blocker, Tylen Grable. Tylen Grable has the exact same measurements as David Edwards. He got some run at guard in training camp. He won the swing tackle job this year over Ryan Vandemark. And if you were to extend David Edwards, there's really going to be no real path for some of these guys to ever become starters for you. And if you try to find opportunities on your roster to get a little cheaper, you know, this is the type of stuff you have to consider. I mean, Cyrus Torrance, he's going to be extension eligible after this season. And these guards are getting paid like a ton of money. Is Osiris Torrance going to be a $15 million a year guard after this year? That's not crazy to think, maybe even higher. And so how do you find some economic starters? Well, maybe this is how you do it. So I'm not dismissing a release for David Edwards, and then you duke it out between Alec Anderson and Tylen Grable to be your starting left guard. And then you have the loser of that competition, plus Ryan Vandermark, plus Cedric Van Granger, still as you're developing young players in the pipeline, and certainly you can add to that this offseason. So I think there's two sides to that conversation with David Edwards that you could talk me into. As it relates to Connor McGovern, I think he is definitely an extension candidate. Right now, he's getting paid $7.5 million a season. The transition to center went really, really well, and I think that he'll continue to develop and grow into that spot. I look at some recent deals at center. Tyler Biadasz got $9.75 million from Washington. Andre James got $8 million from the Raiders. Lloyd Cushenberry, the Titans gave him $12.5 million. So I think that it's probably fair to think of Connor McGovern as around $10 million a season as a starting center. So I think that will potentially happen. And then again, with David Edwards, I think there's two sides to that conversation that honestly makes sense to me. James says, for herd mentality, I would be curious why an up-and-coming dude who was already a defensive coordinator would then come to Buffalo to be a senior defensive assistant. And James is referring to Ryan Nielsen, who I talked a lot about last week. The Bills hired him to be a senior defensive assistant and really talked about his background and, maybe how the Bills defense could adjust under him. So that was last week. But, and through that conversation, I said, hey, Ryan Nielsen has been regarded as one of the bright up-and-coming defensive minds in the NFL. And so he has been a defensive coordinator the last 3 years. One of them was as the co-defensive coordinator with the Saints. And so he left the Saints to go be the guy, right, the defensive coordinator in Atlanta. Well, the staff got fired after one season of him being there. And he improved that Atlanta defense tremendously. From the previous year, they went from 23rd to 18th in points per game. They went to 27th to 11th in yards per game, and they doubled their sack production. They went from 21 sacks, that's it for the whole year, to 42. So there was a lot of growth there, but Arthur Smith and that offense never got it figured out. They fired him, and that means he's got to go somewhere else. Then he's hired by the Jaguars to be their defensive coordinator. This past season, nothing worked in Jacksonville, right? That was a disaster of a situation. And the entire staff gets fired. And so he's back out on the market, and he's got a relationship with Bobby Babich, and probably figures he can go to Buffalo and reset a little bit and position himself for whatever's next in his career. And that's not an uncommon path for a coach to take. And I think that's the answer, is just circumstances have not been good for him to stick anywhere. And now he's got an opportunity to align in Buffalo and help and be part of what's going on, a stable operation, and see if that can position him for his next move. I want to take this opportunity, though, to add a couple of thoughts about Chris Tabor, the Bills special teams coordinator that they hired. I did an episode on him yesterday, so we broke that all down. But two talking points that have kind of come up since that has been people griping about two things: that he's from the Panthers, his last job was with the Panthers, and that he didn't coach anywhere last year. And so people had questions about that. So let's address both of those points. He was with the Carolina Panthers in 2022 and 2023. All right. And then that's it. Like, that's nowhere near when anyone in Buffalo was affiliated with the Panthers. Okay. This is not like another Panthers hire. Like, what? Really? This is an outside of a hire as Sean McDermott could possibly make. No real connection to him. They had not even, they're years apart. They're 7 years apart in Carolina. So I don't really understand that. That's just coincidental that his last job was with Carolina. And then as for him taking a year off, that's not uncommon either. Aaron Kromer sat out 2021 after, not being retained by the Rams, and then being hired in Buffalo in 2022. He sat out 2021. And especially for Chris Tabor as a special teams coach, with the implementation of the new kickoff rules last year, not a bad year to reset. Plus, this guy had to be the interim head coach of the Panthers for like the last 6-7 weeks of that year. So I hear you, but the Panthers gripe and that he sat out last year are just, I think we're just grasping at the air. I'm not sure the validity of those grievances. Andrew says, in recent years, we have seen the Bills fill in gaps in their defense with veteran players and players over 30. Jordan Phillips trading for Rasul Douglas, Mike Edwards at safety signing last year are the three that he pointed to. Given the shift in their defensive coaching hires, do you expect a shift in building our defense through the draft and younger players, or a combo of veterans and younger players? Could we achieve this plus go get Myles Garrett? I think the Bills should be looking more towards the draft for defensive help. I mean, I'd certainly love for them to bring in Myles Garrett or Trey Hendrickson or Max Crosby or whatever big-time pass rusher they could add. I'd love that. But I think that it would be good for them to swing more in the draft for defense, get some legitimate ceiling and athleticism in the building. And I certainly think when you look at Philly and Kansas City, they've went heavy on defense with their early draft selections. And I hope that the Bills do that. And, there's been this notion out there that the Bills should load up on offense and then just figure it out on defense. Well, it's funny how that is flipped upside down completely. So, yeah, I do think that the Bills should emphasize their defense. If you look at the last couple of drafts, I mean, they go Keon Coleman, Cole Bishop with their top two picks. The year before was Kincaid and Torrance. So of their last two drafts, their first and second round picks, 3 out of the 4 have been offensive players. All right. Well, maybe it's time to look at that a little bit differently and see if you can get some ceiling on the defensive side of the football. All right, folks, coming up on the other side of it, we are going to continue with some outstanding questions, including some draft philosophy stuff. So folks, be sure to stick with me. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, never feel like I miss my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, the next one comes from Colin, who says, watching the Eagles wax the Chiefs, it was obvious to us all where the Bills need to get better. Defensive line and secondary. To borrow Sean McDermott's speak, it was the perfect marriage between pass rush and coverage for the Eagles with dominance at the line of scrimmage. Looking at the draft capital available to the Bills and expected cap space, what are the realistic expectations in your mind to how much we can get better in our deficiencies? Surely there are some extensions on the way, but how much can the gap be closed between what the team currently has and what is needed? McDermott and Beane made it pretty clear that they know what is separating them from playing in a Super Bowl versus just having a deep playoff run. Well, I think the Bills are sitting pretty with assets, certainly more so than they've had in recent years. They're not brimming with cap space, but they're not also having to clear $50 million to become cap compliant. They should have a few bucks. They have 3 meaningful draft picks. They have 2 second-round picks, so pick 30 in the first round, and then 56 and 62 in the second round. I'd like to think that you have some great opportunities to add there, in addition to any, free agent moves that you make, any trades that you make. But more than anything, it's you just got to be right. You have to be right. You have to be right about it. But I think there's a number of reasons why the Bills will be better. Certainly outside additions, coaching additions, right? There's been some meaningful additions to the defensive coaching staff. I think the dynamics of 2024 being behind them defensively will matter. where, I mean, look at the dynamics. It's a rookie defensive coordinator and Bobby Babich. Tons of turnover, both coaching in and personnel. Tons of turnover on the defensive side of the ball. Milano gets hurt in camp. Taron Johnson gets hurt week 1. Terrell Bernard gets hurt very early in the season. You're trying to play the Ravens with Balin Spector as your Mike linebacker. Von Miller gets suspended. Later in the season, the safeties are hurt. Rasul Douglas is hurt. You wind up going through the year with Daquan Jones and Greg Rousseau as your only 2 defensive starters to not miss a game due to injury. Those dynamics are difficult for a first-year defensive coordinator to navigate. So those dynamics being in the past matters. In addition to, you're going to have better contributions from developing young players like a Terrell Bernard, like a Greg Rousseau, like a Christian Benford, Cole Bishop. These are young players that are important to the defense that I think should be better. So I think there's a number of reasons why, in addition to having some opportunities to improve through the draft and in player acquisition, whether that's trades or free agency, I think the Bills are positioned well to be better on defense. And so the biggest thing is being right about the players that you add and making sure that they're making the impact that you need from them. Drew says, recently you've been talking about the defensive shortcomings situationally, like on third downs. Are these shortcomings specifically actionable? In baseball, they are not. The best hitters in high leverage situations, like end of game or runners in scoring position, are the best hitters overall. And there's no way to be better in clutch situations than the obvious one of being a better hitter overall. And football is their specific way for the Bills to improve in key situations. Well, I would point to everything that I just said in the previous questions. And it does come down to that. Like, if the Bills are a better overall defense, they will be a better third down defense. They're in more manageable third downs. They are more effective rushing the passer. Their coverage is tighter. Like, all of that's could lead to the defense being better, which would make them situationally better. I think it's very similar, but in terms of something being actionable, it's everything I just talked about and how that outside additions, coaching additions, dynamics of 2024 being in the past, developing young players, continuing to develop. It's absolutely improvable. And through that, you hope to have better coaching, you hope to have better players, and you hope to have a better defense. PJ says, Joe, it's a fair criticism that Beane is unable to find year one impact players in the draft. In your opinion, how much of this is an inability to spot talent versus their commitment to culture fit? Are they willingly sacrificing early returns for a more sustainable pipeline of prospects? I don't think that's it at all. I think the Bills, if you look at their top picks, every first pick in a draft that Brandon Beane has made, Josh Allen, Tremaine Edmonds, Ed Oliver, AJ Epinesa, Greg Rousseau, Kyer Elam, Keon Coleman, Dalton Kincaid. Those have been his top picks in every draft. A lot of high tools players. A lot of high tools. Every one of them is a dynamic athlete in some way, shape, or form. I would say every single one of them also were a bit underdeveloped. I think these are all big swings. And I think that's a product of really not having high picks. I mean, that's twice that his top pick was a second rounder. I mean, certainly Allen and Oliver are top 10 picks, but that's not really the case for these other guys. And so Kincaid, kind of new to football, athletic, but, still a curve. Keon Coleman has only had like 2 years of his life just focused on football. Big-time athletic profile outside of a 40-yard dash. Young, right? Looking for a swing. Kyer Elam, extremely young. Dynamic athlete. Took a swing. Greg Rousseau, tools. New to playing defensive line. Epinesa, I don't know. That was probably a more high floor pick. And I think they've gotten a decent rotational player. Ed Oliver, athleticism was the name of the game there. Obviously doesn't have length or mass, but looking for that penetration style player that can make plays in the backfield. Josh Allen, the swing of all swings, right? Tremaine Edmonds, young, athletic, not super developed, right? I think maybe that's the reality, is that they're trying very hard to get some home runs with some very young, very athletic, but underdeveloped players. And I think through that, there's been, obviously there's a few major hits there, but for the most part, probably not. And certainly Beane's had his hits outside of his top picks, but kind of focusing in on those premium investments, that's kind of the theme that I see. So, every GM has their hits and misses, and hopefully there's some better stories to tell moving forward. And Beane can complement his success with some of the picks that come in the middle to late rounds, like a Terrell Bernard, a Christian Benford, a Spencer Brown, those types of players. You can pair those with, big time hits early, and maybe you'll have a roster like the Eagles one day. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on this episode. Thanks for being here. We're going to talk either offensive line or receivers tomorrow. We'll see what makes the most sense. Maybe there'll be some big news, but we'll have another episode for you this week, so don't miss it. Come on back. As always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.